All right, and it looks like we have a good number of our participants joining us. So we'd like to thank you all for joining us on this week's virtual Monday evening exploration. I'm Michaela Hall, Manager of Public Programs, and I'm delighted to introduce our guest tonight, Leslie Surprenant. Leslie is an Adirondack native and was a longtime friend of conservationist and author Anne LaBastille. LaBastille surprised Leslie by nominating her to execute her estate, which Leslie learned only after LaBastille's death in 2011. Since then, Leslie has worked hard to build a lasting LaBastille legacy from Anne's bold and aspirational vision. She shares photos, stories, and presentations on the remarkable life and ancestry of this trailblazer. Leslie is retired from a 35-year career as a biologist with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation and is a professional ski instructor, a New York State licensed guide, and a home project do-it-yourselfer. As you all know, we've been in challenging times this spring and summer, and we're still adjusting to and learning how to engage our members and the public through digital platforms. So we'd like to just give a few pointers. If you would like to submit a question during this conversation, please submit through the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom window. We also have staff monitoring the chat, so if you have any technical difficulties, please use the chat function, and we'll work with you to try to solve the problem. We also would like to ask you to use the chat function if you'd like to share any stories about Anne, if you've happened to meet her, which we know that we hear many stories about Anne at the museum, as does Leslie. So if you have stories that you'd like to share, if you could put those in the chat, that would be wonderful, and we'll save the Q&A for the questions. We wanted to make just a couple more notes before we get started. First of all, for anybody who is on Facebook, there is a private group, the Anne LaBastille Fan Club, that you can join. You'll just have to fill out a request to do so. And also tonight in the chat, we'll be sharing a sneak peek at our 3D scan of the interior of Anne's cabin. So you can look for that link in the chat. And we'll be adding tags and information to that scan. And once that's all complete, we'll add it to our website, www.adkx.org. And finally, we just want to note that we are presenting live from the Adirondack Experience, and we're inside the Life in the Adirondack exhibition. So I'm sitting just outside of Anne's cabin, and Leslie has the privilege of sitting inside Anne's cabin. And Leslie, I believe you've been inside Anne's cabin before, and maybe you could just tell us a little bit about how you knew Anne.
So I knew Anne because I grew up in the Adirondacks in about the same area that she had this cabin, and I just knew her as just a piece of local. She was just a member of the local community, and I knew I wanted to be a conservationist from the time I was very young. And people would tell me I needed to talk with her, but she was very elusive to reach, and because she was always off doing consults and writing her books and that sort of thing. But I would see her and I would talk with her, but we really got to be friends after I was in college. When I was in college, I wrote to her, and like so many other young people in conservation, I was looking for some guidance. And she would write back, "You must go to Cornell." Well, I didn't go to Cornell. I went to the Environmental Science and Forestry School. When I got out, I was a wilderness ranger. And then at that point, she said, "It's really time for us to get to know each other." And we were friends from then on. And that dates back to about 1981.
Excellent. Thanks so much. And thank you so much for making the trip to join us in person tonight.
My pleasure. It's just wonderful to be back in the cabin.
And can you tell us a little bit about Anne's family and her life growing up?
Sure. So Anne didn't say much about her family in her books. And I think basically she said, my mother was a concert pianist and my dad was a teacher. Well, as I went through her things, I mean, she had told me something about her family background, but it wasn't something that she shared a lot. But I learned that she came from a really charismatic, well-educated, very driven family. And she was a single child. Her mom was a concert pianist, but she also was a number of other things, including she was a writer for the London Times, the New York Times. She was an expert on South and Central American dance and music, and she would perform all these live events, and she was this really flamboyant person. And her dad, when her mom and dad were married, her dad was an executive with General Motors and lived in Argentina. And so he and her mom lived in Argentina to begin with, and then they came back to the States and lived in New York City, and Anne was born in New York City. And then they moved to Montclair, New Jersey, where she lived until she graduated from high school.
Excellent. Thank you. Can you tell us a bit about Anne's years as a student at Cornell, and if there was a professor, course, or experience that had a particular impact on her and her direction?
Sure. So she was encouraged to go to Cornell because it was really open to women. However, she was the only female at the time studying wildlife and only the second one in natural resources. And there was a professor named Dr. Lawrence Hamilton, and he had great interest in multidisciplinary approaches to ecology, and was sort of one of the early pioneers in ecosystem management. And he had a particular interest in Latin America, South America, and Anne and he became close. He was a confidant, an advisor, and I would say a favorite professor. And as folks have gotten in touch with me who went to school with Anne, who knew her, just said this, Larry Hamilton was just a beloved professor amongst so many students. And so he was, I think he was somebody that mentored her and encouraged her along. And her one experience that she had there was she would go around the campus with a backpack, ripped up blue jeans and bare feet, and somebody reported her to the dean. And so the dean looked at her school records and said, geez, you know, she gets decent grades, she participates, so really, what is your problem? And the problem went away and never had to put on shoes, and she was able to, you know, be herself at Cornell.
That's a great story. Thanks for sharing that. Can you tell us a little bit about some of Anne's passions?
Sure, yeah, so no surprise, she was very passionate about the environment. Some people ask why she didn't spend more time working on the environment of the United States. Well, of course, she was very passionate about the Adirondacks and acid rain and that sort of thing. But she was really interested in promoting conservation in underfunded and underdeveloped countries like Latin America and the Caribbean. And she felt like the United States really had the resources. If we chose to work on it, we had the resources, and these other countries didn't. So she was passionate about the environment, passionate about her dogs, and really passionate about environmental and social justice for the Mayan communities around Lake Atitlan, and especially the Mayan women around Lake Atitlan in Guatemala, where she did her work.
Great, thank you. You mentioned that Anne loved her dogs, and I was wondering if you could just share what happened to Anne's last dog?
Okay. Well, Anne's last dog, believe it or not, was named Krispy Kreme. And she was a German Shepherd, and Anne had to go into long-term care because of memory issues, dementia. And she had asked me when I was much younger, about 25 years before she went into care, if I would take whatever dog she had at the time. And it was easy to make that say yes at the time, but suddenly Krispy Kreme needed a home, but I had a family, so I went home and we talked over the dinner table, and our daughter said, Krispy Kreme needs a forever home, and our daughter's adopted, and she said, you gave me a forever home, this dog needs a forever home. So we brought Krispy Kreme home, and she became part of our family. And I could share pictures if folks would like to see pictures of Krispy Kreme. I'm not sure if you'd want to see them now or at the end of this session. Do you have a sense of that, Michaela? Would you like to see them now?
I think people would be delighted to
okay, all right. So Krispy lived with us, and she was a wonderful dog. We got her, she was age 4, and she lived to be age 12. But I can share a few pictures of Krispy with our family. Can you see this? Can you see a picture?
I think everybody can see.
Okay. So here's our daughter, and Crispy and I and she were on a backpacking trip. Here is Crispy and our daughter laying on the dog bed, and Crispy and our daughter became very, very close. And Crispy was pressed into service as the big bad wolf. So.
Would you be able to open up any of those files so we could get a slightly larger view of the images?
Is that it? Do you see it well?
It's still showing just the list of all of them.
Oh, I'm not sure. See, I see a picture. So, okay. Are you seeing a bunch of thumb drive, little?
Yep.
Okay.
Little thumbnails.
Let's try
so
this.
Maybe try clicking on it again.
Yep. Open. Well, this might be giant. Is that better? Does that show you a picture of our daughter with her dog?
Okay, one of our audience members is saying that you have to be on the picture when you open it up. So maybe if you stop sharing and then open it, it will work. And thank you very much for the help. Audience member, Linda.
Okay, so stop sharing. Yeah, I don't want to spend a lot of time trying to do this if it's going to take away from her. So I would have to have opened the picture itself ahead of time. Okay. Let's see here. Yeah, I'm not sure this is going to work.
Okay.
So,
well,
sorry about that.
We'll try to get some of those open a little bit later on, but we'll move on to the next question.
Okay.
And could you tell us a little bit about Anne's work with the Documerica project?
Sure. So that was a project that was funded by the Environmental Protection Agency, and it was in the early 1970s, shortly after the Environmental Protection Agency was formed. And the idea was, what the EPA did was hired a number of photojournalists, about 100 photojournalists, to document the condition of the environment at that time and efforts to improve the environment that were going on. And so it was this project where they amassed tens of thousands of photographs and was one of the selected photographers. And the photographers were paid $150 a day, plus film, plus their expenses. And actually the EPA brought that project back in 2011 to 2013, but did not pay people, just opened it up to the public and said, just submit us your pictures on the environment and changes. So the idea was that changes could be tracked over time and it would improve our interest in the environment. So, and I know that Adirondack Museum has the whole collection of the Documerica slides that she had.
Thank you. And we did have a couple of questions coming in from audience members, so we can take those and then come back to some of our questions.
Okay.
And Jill is wondering if Anne always had German Shepherds.
Yes, she did. Always German Shepherds. And her first one she got when she was in Guatemala.
And Kevin is saying that he's been to Twitchell's site, and he's wondering where Thoreau's cabin is located.
That you have to find on your own based on the clues that you would pick up from beyond Black Bear Lake, or it's also called Woodswoman 2. That's the mystery that you have to solve for yourself.
All right, Kevin, good luck with that.
Or you can hire a New York State licensed guide.
And Leslie, why do you think people, especially women, connected to Anne through her books when they were first published? And do you think young women today continue to connect to Anne through her books and her life story?
I think women connected because Anne, it was really the coming together, it was the feminist movement was really strong, and Woodswoman came out in 1978, and so the feminist movement, the more modern one, had been in place for a number of years. And I think Anne was this person that they could relate to, that she went through a very difficult time. She shared her vulnerabilities in her book, and they could see that this person seemed like a resilient, she was obviously strong, she was physically and emotionally, and that she could build this log cabin, she could run a chainsaw, she could live without electricity, running water, etc. And I think it gave them the strength to take the little steps that they might need to take if they were in a difficult relationship or stuck somewhere. It's like, well, she could do all that, maybe I can do something like that, or even take those first steps. So I think that she just gave them a model that they could really grasp. And so in terms of is our young women today still as struck? And I would say yes. And I know this because young women have contacted me. And after one of my presentations, this woman came to me and she said, wow, she said, I saw this, it was at Cornell University. And she said, I'm a whatever major she was. And she said, I'm thinking to minor in conservation. She said, this is just so inspiring that, I think I want to go into that career. And I did an article for the New York State Conservationist, and a parent wrote into the Conservationist and said, our little girl, 6 years old, read this article, and she went to work and she built a little model cabin with little paper doll Anns. And I know, a young woman in Buffalo, and she read Woodswoman when she was a teenager, and this is just a few years ago, and she is going into conservation. So I know that young women want to do something similar, and maybe some of the stuff in Anne's book is a little bit dated, but her model is still solid, that it's a good career for women.
Excellent, wonderful. And I know we have a wonderful story of a young woman in one of the videos here in Life in the Adirondacks as well, which is quite inspirational, and she found inspiration in Anne as well. And can you tell us a little bit about how Anne discovered the Adirondacks?
Sure. So she was, after she graduated from high school, she moved down to Miami, and she was living with her mother and going to a school in Miami and studying marine biology. And she didn't like it a whole lot, but that's what she was doing at the time. And she started to work for the Audubon Society and or the National Park Service. And she met a naturalist who, they talked, and he took a liking to her and told her that she could get summer work where he had a lodge in the Adirondacks, and she had not heard of this place. So she decided that's what she would like to do, but her mother told her flat out she wasn't going to do it. And here's a backstory that hasn't been very often shared, but she decided that she was darn well going to go to the Adirondacks, and she entered a bit of subterfuge with her father, who lived in New Jersey still. And Anne finished her last day of school and escaped to the airport in Miami and took a red-eye flight to Newark, New Jersey, where her dad met her and drove her to Big Moose Lake in the Adirondacks. And her mother was none the wiser and, finally tracked her down. But she basically literally escaped to the Adirondacks. And then she just fell in love with the Adirondacks. So that was her first experience, and how she ended up here in her early 20s.
All right, great, thank you. And we have a couple of questions from audience members. This is from Jenny. Was Anne married, and did her husband share her passion?
Yes, I'm not sure if you've read her books, but Woodswoman makes it really clear she was married, and what started the whole cabin thing was that they got divorced. And what was the second part? Was she ever married? And
did Major share her passion?
Oh, yes. She was married to Major Bowes, who his name was actually Claude Vernon, but he went by Major. And absolutely, he was the naturalist that invited her to work for him. They eventually fell in love, and they did get married. And he was about 14 or 15 years her senior. But yeah, he was very passionate. He was just a naturalist, very passionate about preservation, and they shared that love. And in fact, they had a business when they weren't when they weren't running the lodge in the summer, they were leading trips through the Caribbean, Cuba, all of those areas. They were leading natural history trips. It was very knowledgeable.
Excellent, thank you. Why do you think Anne entrusted you with her legacy as her executor?
Well, she knew me for a long time, and she always viewed me as somebody that was solid and dependable. And she knew that growing up in the Adirondacks, that it gives you some sense of resilience. And she knew my family, and she knew that I worked hard. And we had gotten, obviously by that time, we'd gotten to know each other. And I'm younger than her by about 25 years. And she sort of viewed me as the daughter that she never had, and having no children, and needing to have somebody that was able to address this. She nominated me, but I wasn't the person that was initially supposed to do it. But she had nominated me as her, what they call a successor executor, that if the person that was supposed to do it didn't do it, I was supposed to help him. And he was unable to do it, and he told me that from day one. And so that's how this came as a total surprise to me. But yeah, but I know she held me in high regard.
What were some of the most surprising things you learned about her as you worked through her estate matters?
I'll tell you a couple of them. One is that she was a model. When she was in high school, she signed on with a modeling agency, and I think it was to save money for college. I found her modeling,
Portfolio?
Portfolio, that's the word. I didn't find any proof that she actually did model, but she was with the Conover modeling agency, which then was purchased by Ford. And let's see, that was one surprise. Another one was that she was on To Tell the Truth. I think it was in 1959, one of the 3 contestants on To Tell the Truth. You can actually find that on YouTube. And the third surprise was that she had a place in Guatemala that I had to deal with. And it was unknown to me that she had property in a little home in Guatemala. And unfortunately, I can't load up the picture, but I had hoped to share a picture of her cute little Guatemalan hut. So there's 3 surprises that.
Excellent. Thank you. And we have a couple of questions from the audience. From Abby at Paul Smith College. Abby is wondering when Anne was actively writing her books.
She had about 15 books. And the first one, came out, it was 1967. And she wrote all the way up until 2000, I think it was 2004 was Woodswoman 4, if I'm not mistaken. So pretty much from the mid-1960s to the mid-2000s.
Okay, great. Thank you. And as we mentioned, we are in and around Anne's cabin at the museum, and the museum received Anne's cabin and a number of her personal effects. But we know that Anne didn't will the cabin to the museum. So how do you think she would feel about her cabin being donated to us?
Honestly, I think she would not be happy because her vision was that her cabin was going to be preserved on her property, and the occasional writer would be able to come and stay in it for a few days. And I was supposed to start a nonprofit, and without getting into a lot of details, it just simply was not feasible. And the Adirondack Museum had approached me about taking the cabin, and I just decided that it was a way of preserving it, of telling the story, and to actually have it as she would like it. And I think she really was always sort of like, if you can't do it, it's that you weren't working hard enough. And I would, love to be able to tell her all of the reasoning, but I did have to go through a process of changing her will, coming up with a whole plan. And I did show without question that a nonprofit would not be successful in 6 to 10 years. And so now the cabin's been here in the museum for 3 years, and I think for years into the future. And I think it was just a good way to preserve it as it was, as she kept it.
Mm-hmm.
I hope she will forgive me.
I hope so too, and I think she will, because so many people have made the journey to see her cabin, and we've heard so many wonderful stories about how much Anne meant to them. And I just wanted to ask if you could maybe tell us a little bit about the writing residency at the Center for Writing, since you were also able to meet that request as well in a slightly different way.
Okay, so what Anne envisioned for her legacy was a scholarship at Cornell to support writers, and she envisioned this little nonprofit, and writers, the occasional writer would come and be at her cabin, and she also envisioned her property was going to be, and cabin, kept pristine and forever wild. So I identified partners to work with to really be able to build a lasting legacy based on partnerships and not all the eggs in one basket, a nonprofit or one organization. So I approached the Adirondack Center for Writing, and I just cold called the director of the Adirondack Center for Writing one day, and I said, this was after I had approval to do this I had to talk to the surrogate court judge, and I had approval to move forward, but I never said a word to the Adirondack Center for Writing before this. So I called her, Natalie Thill, up on a July afternoon, and I said, look, I've got this, of course she knew Anne. Anne was on their board of directors, that sort of thing. So I said, look, I've got to deliver a writing legacy under Anne's estate, and what would you feel about an estate sponsored writer's residency? And she just said, oh my goodness, I've wanted to do that. That's been my dream. And as it turns out, we came up with a scalable plan, and Natalie and the Adirondack Center for Writing have been wonderful to work with. But as it turned out, by serendipity, there was the Twitchell Inn, which is a beautiful kind of turn of the 19th, 20th century lodge right on Twitchell Lake, where Anne had her cabin, and it had just been completely and lovingly restored, and it had plenty of room, and it happened to have 1 week open, and happened to be something that a group could rent for like a week or two. So it turns out that now there is a well-established writer's residency that they get about 100 applicants, and 6 writers are selected, and it costs the writers only their application fee, and then they get 2 weeks of space and writing community together, and it's just been a wonderful, wonderful thing. And I think if it's supposed to happen again in October, I think they're still on track to hold it, and this will be the 6th year. And they do have, I'll put a shout out, they do have one day in the middle of the residency that they do public readings. I'm not sure if that's going to be able to be done this year with the virus, but if you're at all interested, look for it in future years. So that's been funded with $454,000 from the estate.
Excellent, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
We'll take one more question related to Anne's estate, and then we have quite a few questions coming in through the Q&A. So at the museum, we have a number of Anne's papers, and within those papers, there are many letters that she received from some from admirers, and the content and tone of the letters range from heartfelt thanks to adoration and even flirtation to condescending and even vaguely threatening. And how did Anne deal with these different types of reactions and these different types of attention that she received?
I think her emotions, as you would expect, would be across the board, from, feeling honored that people were looking to her as a role model, maybe flattered, maybe sometimes humbled, and on the other end of the extreme, terrified, because if when somebody makes a threat to you and you live all by yourself in the sticks and you don't have electricity and all that sort of thing. So she responded to that by having friends always watching out for her. She made no secret of the fact that she kept loaded firearms in her cabin, and I can attest to that. I found them. And so that was on the one end of the spectrum. And she would, she had like air horns and that sort of thing. She could get help from. On the other end of the spectrum, she used to write back. I mean, she wouldn't write back to the people that threatened her, but she would tell the police, that sort of thing. But she, at first, she wrote back to everybody, and then when she was literally getting bags of fan mail. That's actually, one of the ways we got to know each other. She invited me to spend a weekend with her to catch up on her correspondence. She literally had an entire bag, and she was, I was opening correspondence, and we were talking about it, and et cetera. It was a whole weekend of hard work. So she would literally get bags of mail, and she was off consulting, and so she would get back, and there would be like these giant canvas bags. So she was writing back to everybody until she couldn't do it anymore. And then she would write back to somebody that had a particularly compelling, heart-rendering story, somebody that really seemed like they needed some guidance and some help. And she made some friendships from, people that went from pen pals. She would always write back. And fortunately for me, I wrote to her when she always wrote back. And that's part of how we started a friendship.
I'm going to grab some more questions from the audience. And
I'm going to grab a drink of water.
This is a question from Carla. And Carla is wondering, what was her relationship with Major? If you'd be comfortable talking about Anne's relationship with Major.
She married him. They were married 9 years, and they divorced.
Okay. All right. Thank you. When did she move to Vermont?
Never.
Okay. Alrighty. Maybe you could tell us she moved over towards Lake Champlain, however, correct?
Yeah, maybe the question is more like, did she have someplace besides the cabin? And the answer to that is yes. And about, I think it was maybe 1988, she bought an old farm. Well, I'll just back up 1 second. She was spending some winters down in Miami. After her mother passed away, she inherited a house in Miami, and it was a good place for her to jump off and do her consulting or environmental consulting that was often in the Caribbean, and the place needed work and that sort of thing. Her intent was to sell it. She sold her this place in Miami and bought this 40, I think it's I can't remember how many acres it was, but it's an old farm in Wadhams, in the Adirondack Park near Elizabethtown, and it had a lovely old barn, and it had an old farmhouse that needed a lot of work. And I spent her first night with her in that house. I helped her. I met the moving truck, and we moved all her stuff in, and I spent the first night there with her. And then that was, so that was probably what people are thinking about. But she did not live in Vermont.
Okay, great. Thank you. And Carol is wondering, would Anne be happy with the Adirondacks today?
I think so. I think, maybe some of the development she wouldn't be, but she realized, I mean, as much of a preservation bent that she had, she knows that people need to make a living here. And I think that she would be happy to know that trout now live in Twitchell Lake when they couldn't live there before. I'm going to make a little aside here. And, unfortunately, our environmental regulations are being rolled back quite quickly. And if the way things were going is actually the acid deposition in the Adirondack, especially the western Adirondack, had declined, and the streams and the lakes were really coming back, and there were more fish. So I think she'd be really pleased that she could catch a fish off her dock now. I mean, some of the things she might not be really happy with, but I think pretty much she would be happy.
Great, wonderful, thank you. And Amy is wondering, what is the original lodge she and her husband ran on Big Moose?
It's called Covewood Lodge. It's on the National Historic Register, and Major passed on in 2013 or 15, I think. His former wife Diane runs it and, with his daughter. And they do, if you ever are in the area, they do welcome people to stop in and look at it. So it was Covewood Lodge on Big Moose Road, Big Moose Lake.
Thank you. We have another one from Amy. Does Leslie know what other buildings are on the cabin site?
Anne's cabin site, I presume.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I believe so.
Well, there was Anne's main cabin that I'm sitting in that she named West of Wind. She had 2 lean-tos, and a half mile back at the back part of her property, she built Thoreau 2, and that was the subject of her Woodswoman 2 book, or Beyond Black Bear Lake. So yes, 4 structures.
Great. And is there a foundation that helps keep the population of Twitchell Lake low?
No, it's no. There's a Twitchell Lake Fish and Game Commission, and that's their equivalent of a lake owners association. There's state land at where there's a boat access site, and that part of the lake is part of a wild forest, the Fulton Chain Wild Forest. And then all around the lake are private parcels, and some of the camps date back to the 1800s. And then there are 2 other pieces of state land, of which Anne's property, I donated Anne's property to the state, so that's the state. So there's nothing that keeps the population low other than demand.
Okay, great, thank you. And Linda is asking if there might be a reprinting of The Wilderness World.
Oh, Wilderness World of Anne LaBastille. Oh, gee, I would love to see the Adirondack Museum partner with another organization to have that reprinted. So I don't know. I did hand all copyright and rights that could be transferred to the Foundation for Herkimer and Oneida County. That is the foundation that holds the funds for the writer's residency and a separate women's writers workshop that's held annually at Sagamore, Great Camp Sagamore. And so I actually made some recommendations to them that they would try to bring some of her works back into print. And I did suggest in that a partnership between the Adirondack Museum and whatever entity to bring that forward. I think that would be a great project.
And Rosemary is asking where the bedroom in the cabin is, or was.
Where the bedroom in the cabin was, I'm wondering if I can take my computer and pick it up and show you. It's the way that the cabin has been reconstructed here is not exactly as she had it, but we'll just say Michaela is sitting just outside of the cabin with me. She's just on the other side of these logs. And behind her is a little bit of an overhang that they've left open. And so I'm going to try this. I'm going to take my computer. See, there's this little place here. And you basically, there's a little bit of a log stairway that's through there. And then up there is a hole. And over that hole was Van Gogh's Starry, Starry Night in a frame. And it was her secret place where she crawled in, and that was her sleeping loft. So the museum has reconstructed her cabin as she originally had it before she closed it off and made that her little bedroom. So it was a little loft bedroom.
Okay, and Leslie, unfortunately, we did lose you a little bit while the computer was moving.
Okay, so here I am.
Let everybody know that if you click on the link for the 3-dimensional scan in the chat, you should be able to really explore all the way around in the cabin, and you'll be able to see the secret door in there as well. It's just an open, it looks like a window opening right now, but that is what she used for her bedroom door, and it's the area above the front door that you can see behind me.
So it is it's the hole that's not above the books. So yeah.
All right, and we'll just bring up a couple more questions. Abby is wondering if Anne had any books that weren't published.
She wanted to write a romance novel, and she started it, and she shopped it around, and there were no takers. I donated that to Cornell University. If anybody's interested in seeing it, original manuscripts and this proposed romance novel, I would invite you to visit in person once you can, Cornell's collection of rare manuscripts.
That's great, thank you.
And just to like put aside a rumor, I keep seeing a persistent rumor that Anne was working on Woodswoman 5. It is not true. I handled every single piece of paper, and I would have found some written notes, some manuscript, and to be quite honest, she barely got Woodswoman 4 distributed. I found 5,000 copies in a storage unit, so there was no start to Woodswoman 5, just to be clear.
Okay, great, thank you. And Linda's wondering what your favorite memory of Anne is, Leslie.
Oh, so many. Oh my gosh, that's a great question. You know what it is? I think there are a lot of them, but here's kind of a fun one. She and I co-taught Women in Woods weekends at Sagamore for a couple years in the mid-1990s, and they always, she always would ask them to get the men away in the morning because the ladies were going to skinny dip. And mind you, this is late September. Late September in the Adirondacks is pretty cold. But the women at this weekend were invited to come skinny dip with the loons and us. And so we would go do that, and the men were kind enough to not be around. So nobody did it with us, but she and I would go and swim with the loons in the mist. And she would have, in the cabin, she had a hot bath. She had this cabin at they let her stay in this little cabin at Sagamore, and it had an old claw tub, and she filled it with hot water, and she had a little stove, or I think in there, but she would make a little pot of espresso, and after we get out of the freezing cold lake, we raced into her cabin, and we would sit together in this steaming hot bathtub sipping espresso and just talking about, because I was helping her guide that, and she was guiding some trips and I was guiding some trips, and we would just talk about how it was going and talk about our day, and it was just really like a sweet and sort of, you know, kind of a just between friends intimate time that we would just have together. So that's one of my good memories.
Nice. That sounds wonderful. And Bridget is wondering, did Anne play the guitar that is behind you?
She did, yes. I never heard her play, but if you read in Woodswoman itself, when Major seemed to be really interested or invited her on this camping trip, and they flew into a lake on a plane and got dropped off for an overnight camping trip, and it was before they were together. He had sequestered amongst all this stuff a guitar and handed it to her, and he knew that she could play, and he asked her to play. So if you read Woodswoman, that might jump out at you once you've heard that.
And from Carol, we have that she has read Mama Pock, and she's wondering if Anne was heartbroken about the extinction of the species.
Yes, she was. Yep. And so what she did after that, when she got herself together, she started a nonprofit that didn't last very long because she did get ill, and they focused that on habitat protection around the lake, planting native species, and a piece of it was was working on the health of the Native Mayan women. And I won't get into a lot of detail because we don't have the time, but yeah, she tried to pick up the pieces and go from there.
And from Thomas, Thomas is wondering if you could talk about Anne's Adirondack conservation efforts.
Probably the most primary, well, probably two major ones. One is that she was nominated or appointed to the Adirondack Park Agency, and she was on the Adirondack Park Agency for 17 years, and she resigned after an arsonist burned her barn at her farm. It was this beautiful old barn, and there was some other vandalism that happened. She resigned from the Adirondack Park Agency after that, but she was very passionate, obviously, about protecting the waters and the forests from acid rain. So, those were probably like the two major pieces. And then, of course, she did a lot of popular articles that would draw people's attention to the Adirondacks, its beauty and its fragility and its ecosystems.
And was Anne active in the Twitchell Lake Fish and Game Club?
She was, yep. She was the president of it at one time, or the secretary of it. I take that back. I'm not positive she was the president, but she was the secretary, and she had a lot of, very active in that. Yep.
And this is a question from Bridget. Did Anne hunt and fish for her own food?
No, she did not. She liked to fish a little bit, but if she depended on her own fishing, she would go hungry.
And Christine wants to know about the book titles from the shelf in the cabin. You have a number of books behind you.
I don't know what they are.
And
I would have to look at them, but I will tell you that this is the tiniest fraction of what she had. She had over 3,000 books, and the Adirondack Museum obviously cannot display 3,000 books, nor did it take 3,000 books, but they were across the board, from like books that she had as a child that were these adventures, outdoor adventures, to the entire collection of wildlife monographs and a lot of regional books and that sort of thing, but many books.
And Christine, I believe we actually have a list of all the books on the shelf. So if you wanted to email the museum, we could share that list of what was displayed. And again, as Leslie mentioned, not all of the books that were accepted are on there, but we do have the titles listed. And another question, this is from Luann. Is Leslie working with the curator on a biography of Anne?
No, I'm not. No. But I do know a young woman who's working on one. I've been happy to provide her a lot of contacts and a lot of information, but this question's come up a lot, and I do a slideshow tribute that really tells her life, her story, and shares a lot of photographs and details that she never shared with people. So that's my tribute to her biography.
Excellent. And we have a question from Melissa. What was Anne's favorite food?
Her favorite food, I think, had to be steak. Yeah, she loved steak. Yep.
Excellent, nice. And I believe when we had LaBastille Day a few years ago, we also had some crackers with cream cheese, and was it guava jelly?
Yeah, she loved, one of her favorite treats was, and she introduced me to this, was crackers or toast with guava paste and cream cheese, and it is delicious if you've never tried it.
And another question coming in from Betsy. Did Anne have any family that supported her at the end of her life?
No, she had more chosen family. She was close to a couple of cousins, but both of them lived literally out of the country. And she had a cadre of close friends that were really supportive of her and helped her.
And maybe we'll take this last question, and then we have a request to see some of the pictures. So perhaps Cheryl can share some of the pictures, and you can talk about what we're viewing. And the question is, what would Anne say to Greta Thunberg today?
She would love Greta, and she would just say, don't listen to them, keep doing what you're doing. She always said, persist, resist those people that are speaking against you, and just keep working towards your goal. And that's what she would say. That was a great question. I love it. Oh,
and if we'll do one more question, and this is from Judy. Are there any stories about Anne as a Hellraiser?
Ones that I would share. But I say Hellraiser because I think she was a Hellraiser. She would just tell you what she thought. She would tell you unflinchingly, even though she was a very shy person and introverted. And I think it really, like, she had to really get the strength in her gut to actually tell you. So I call her a Hellraiser because she would, advocate so strenuously, and she just like that. So we never did get into trouble, good or bad, together. So, uh, but she, yeah, just general Hellraiser.
Great, wonderful, thank you. That was a great question too. And we can go ahead and start bringing up the pictures, and if you'd be comfortable talking about what we're seeing.
Sure, yeah, that would be great. And thank you, Cheryl, for having this. So this picture is Krispy Kreme and my daughter. We went on a backpacking trip together, a couple of backpacking trips in the Catskills. Whatever, you could just go, oops. Krispy Kreme got pressed into being the big bad wolf. Our daughter and Krispy were very close, and Krispy she was just a great dog. She would, you could do anything to her. And she was huge. She came to us weighing 115 pounds, but she was really overweight. Her weight that we kept her at was about 95. So there's our daughter and the big bad wolf. And this is our daughter sleeping with Krispy Kreme on the dog bed. We had another dog at the time, a golden retriever named Willa, and people were terrified of Krispy Kreme, but neither one of them was more dangerous than the other. Krispy was just a big, friendly mush. Thanks. After we adopted Krispy Kreme, we would go visit Anne in the memory care unit that she was in, and we would bring Krispy. And suffice it to say, it was heartbreaking. Anne she always wanted to leave with us, of course, and we couldn't take her. But that's me with Anne and Krispy Kreme and our golden retriever, Willa. This is Anne and me at Women of Woods weekend. This is in the Moose River Plains. That dog is Xandor. And Anne had picked up, we were in this bear hunters camp. We just thought it was so neat. And we'd reconned it. We asked them if we could bring the group of women in, and we were going to talk about Adirondack ecology and bears and that sort of thing. And Anne was horsing around, and she picked up that lantern, and she squinted her eyes, and she was like pretending to be like a old miner or something like that. So this picture actually shows up in Woodswoman 3. Next picture. Okay, this is also one of our Women in Woods weekends. That's my canoe. It's a 1890 old canvas and cedar canoe, and Anne loved that canoe. And so I would bring that canoe when we did our Women in Woods weekends. And she always needed to decompress after this. She would just be so high strung, and we always planned time before and after those weekends. And so here it's pouring rain. We were up around Brown's Track ponds, and we nosed up into a stream, and we had to kind of line the canoe through there. So that's her in her rain jacket, moving my canoe through a little narrow passage. This is Anne when she worked for the National Park Service. She watched all her men friends go off and be game wardens and conservation, that sort of, that have these outdoor careers, and she got stuck behind a desk. And I love the look on her face there. She's like such a fake smile, and this guy's beaming at her, and he's got he gets to be out there, and she gets to be behind the desk. And I always like to tell people, what would you caption this picture? Next picture. This is Anne at her hut in Guatemala. And I do have a picture of the interior of it too. This is another picture of Anne when she was with the National Park Service. And note that she is in a skirt, stockings, and flats. And that lasted probably a couple of months or a month. But she writes in one of her books about how she cajoled them and said, this doesn't make any sense. I'm bringing all these people out on these tours, and I have to wear unsensible attire. And they finally allowed her to wear jeans and sensible shoes. So, but I came across this picture and like it. Okay, so here's Anne. She's on a boat. She spent a fair amount of time with somebody who was a romantic interest on a boat, and here's her running the rigging on this Swedish boat. I think she's dropping a dory down. This is the inside of her Guatemalan cabin or hut. This is the inside of her cabin as I found it. That's the outside of her cabin as I found it. Again, that's the kitchen of her cabin as I found it. And that right there is what now is the porch overhang that doesn't have anything in it. And Michaela is sitting right now kind of near where this picture was taken.
Excellent. All right, well, we are just about an hour. So Leslie, thank you so much for joining us tonight and sharing such wonderful stories and memories and information about Anne. I've been seeing that we've been getting a number of comments in the chat about how much people have enjoyed hearing you and hearing about Anne.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. And I really appreciate people having their interest and being willing to tune in. Thank you, everybody.
We'd like to thank all of you for joining us as well. This webinar has been recorded and will be available on the museum's website, www.theadkx.org, in the near future. We also wanted to let you know that the ADKX online store has copies of the Woodswoman series, and you can order copies through our website. And also in 2 weeks, please join us for the last of this year's virtual Monday evening exploration, Arts in the Adirondacks in the Age of Coronavirus, a program featuring staff from Pendragon Theater and the Adirondack Center for Writing in conversation with our own Chief Curator, Laura Rice. Please visit our website for more information on this program and to register for the Monday evening exploration in 2 weeks. And thank you again, Leslie, and to our audience for joining us. Have a good evening.